Good evening and welcome. I am Alicia Clark, CEO and co-founder of Black Art Today. Thank you for joining us this evening for our discussion. It will be moderated by Pat Thornton. In recognition of Father's Day, Black Art Today and Patyna Communications presents the panel discussion, Black Art, Changing the Narrative of Black Fatherhood, One Positive Image at a Time. Our panelists include Dr. Curlee Raven Holton, Director of the David C. Driskell Center and founder of Raven Fine Arts Editions, Larry Poncho Brown, artist, muralist, and art documentarian, David W.M. Cassidy, artist, theologian, and writer, Thomas E. Dade, artist and muralist, and Levi Robinson, artist and muralist. Our panel of Black artists will discuss how being fathers influence their art and the message they convey through their art. Their art encourages, it teaches, and provides positive visual messages that celebrate Black fatherhood. Their art challenges the media, which is marred by racially driven and amplified stigma that has led the world to believe and perceive that Black fathers are widely missing in action, inactive, or simply unfit parents. These men, these fathers, these artists, and their art have changed the narrative, one positive image at a time. Again, thank you for joining us, as this will prove to be a very interesting discussion. And with that, Pat, I pass the virtual mic to you.
Well, thank you so much, Alicia, for passing the virtual mic, and also for both you and Lisa allowing me the opportunity to co-produce this very important event with you. I greatly appreciate it, and hats off to Lisa and Alicia. They are the co-owners and co-producers of Black Art Today. They actually curate and actually represent many of the artists whom you will see today, along with many others. They are continuing the legacy of Black art and making it such that many other people can have access to Black art. So we certainly thank you for doing that. And actually, Alicia took all of my little mini introductions, because as many people know, one of the things that I find very necessary, instead of introducing folks with all the language that I have here, I find it's always best to come from the heart of those to talk about themselves. So given the many introductions, we're going to give everyone an opportunity to just give us your elevator speech about yourself. Just talk about yourself in terms of how you feel, what brought you to have art as the center of your lives. And with that said, I'm going to start with David Cassidy, that is our esteemed David Cassidy, Elder Cassidy. Let's start with you. And David, you're on mute, I believe, so you can unmute yourself.
Okay. So you wanted me to do what?
I want you to just talk a little bit about, just tell us a little bit about yourselves. Introduce yourself. Alicia gave the abbreviated version of David Cassidy, and I find it best to have the amplified version, if you will, directly from the individuals. Mini amplified, if you will.
Well, let me say this. The first thing that I can remember doing in art, I was going to Grape Street Elementary School in Watts, California. And it was a school that was across the street from the house. So you know how strict an environment that was. So if we got in trouble, somebody would come to the fence and holler, "Miss Cassidy, come get your son," you know. But the first thing that I remember, I did a penguin. I recall it being black and white and red. And it was such an interesting conversation that they took me all around the school and they showed off this penguin to every class. So this 5-year-old. This 5-year-old who cried the first day of school until they brought out the milk and cookies, and then I was fine with education after that. But so I grew up in Watts. We left just about the time of the Watts riots and moved to Crenshaw area of Los Angeles. Um, when I went to high school, George Washington High School, 10860 uh, South Dinker in Los Angeles, California. It's the George McKenna story for those who didn't know that. And so when I was there, I did art, but I primarily did ceramics. I was interested in the figurative, and so I did a lot of sculpting. And eventually, I ended up being the class artist for creating the emblems for the Achilleanus class in 1973. I really didn't do a whole lot of. Matter of fact, I didn't do any painting until 1974 when I went home for the summer vacation. There was nothing else to do, and I got tired of drawing, so I decided I was going to paint. And so I went to the paint store and I bought paints, and I sat down and I started painting. And my first painting was that of Cicely Tyson in the Memoirs of Miss Jane Pittman. And so otherwise I would draw from Ebony, from Jet magazine, from Look. I would do Bill Cosby and other persons like that. So I never took a formal art class as far as painting is concerned, but I did watch other artists. I would go to their homes and sit down and pick their brains about how they did this, how did they mix this color and that color and what have you. And I must say before I stop, that the first opportunity that I really got to paint was in 1990 in Nashville, Tennessee. There was an art gallery called In the Gallery and Artworks. And Carlton Wilkinson was the curator of both of those ventures, and he actually owned the place. And I was talking about somebody's artwork, and it was like, how do you call those form figures, like for mannequins? And they were pouring paints and stuff over it and what have you. Absolutely, I just did not like it. I had no idea what it was. I said, I don't like this. That's not art. You just pick up something and pour paint on it. Anybody can do that. And so Carlton said to me, we haven't seen anything you have done. So I went out and bought some canvases and started painting. So really from 1974 to 1990, I hadn't really done any painting. And then I found out in 1990 when I started to paint that I could put things together a lot better than I could then. And so that's where my career started.
All right.
Off of that.
Well, that is a nice brush and overview for us. And we're going to come back to a lot of what you said because there are a lot of pickups on that. I'll move over to Larry Poncho Brown. Larry, I know you're a Baltimore native, and if you can give us your elevator pitch about really it's about the nexus of your beginnings and what really prompted you to make art the center, because I know you were painting signs, so you've been into art all of your life, or shall I say your professional life, so please share.
I am a son of a teenage parent that gave up his dream of being an artist to take care of his family. So my beginnings started early. My father had me when he was 17 years old. My father also attended vocational education, which I later did in following his footsteps to Carver Vocational Technical High School here in Baltimore, Maryland. It was at that time that I realized that not only that the existence I had living with a self-taught artist would impact me so, but it also gave me a leg up when it came to my pursuit of being an artist. My dad was a very frustrated artist. He was born in 1945, so you can imagine in 45, 50, 60, 70, there were no real opportunities for artists to pursue. So my dad, I think, didn't really want me following that footstep because of his frustration. But nonetheless, I picked up the baton and really decided to try to fill in them places where he never could. And so that was my humble beginnings into getting into art.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And, you know, Larry Poncho Brown's bio actually led me to go right over to Mr. Levi. And I caught Levi unawares, but you know, Levi, in your bio, you mentioned something that actually was triggered by something that Larry said. He said, "I feel a social responsibility to create images that depict Black beauty, intelligence, and humanity in order to combat stereotypes and misinformation that have devalued the social standing of people who look like me and share my culture. Every artist dips his brush in his soul and paints his own nature into his pictures." And it just dovetailed so well from what Larry Poncho Brown was saying that I want to go to you next. Tell us a little bit about your beginnings and about your heart with art.
Okay. Well, it's an honor, you know, you saying it's something, you know, that a quote, I guess, from me, you know, you're dovetailing it off of something that Poncho said, because ironically, Poncho is one of the artists that inspired me. He's one of those, you know, select, you know, that select group of, you know, Black artists that really had an impact on the way, you know, I viewed art and how we depict our, you know, our people. So it's an honor to be on this panel with them, along with all, you know, the other gentlemen. So thank you, you know, again, Mr. Poncho, you know, and others. So to get to my beginnings, my first memory of ever having any, I guess, any real even understanding of what art was from, I had an uncle that I'm from Newark, New Jersey, and I had an uncle who was you know, self-taught, you know, much like, you know, Poncho's father, and he had done a mural on my bedroom wall. You know, it was a lion and a Black Panther fighting in the jungle, you know, and it just covered the whole span of my bedroom wall. And I went to sleep staring at that mural every night, you know, and my uncle was my hero, you know, in so many ways. So as I grew, you know, and I tried to, you know, follow in his footsteps, and, you know, again, in a myriad, you know, number of ways, that was one of the things that was driving me, you know, even without realizing, you know, what was happening. It's what was happening. And so what I ended up doing was, you know, obviously I started teaching myself, you know, just, you know, small parts. Obviously, start off with body parts, you know, whatever. And then I started growing up and graffiti blew up. Me being from, you know, Newark, New Jersey, it was huge, you know, for us, and, you know, for myself and all my peers. And so we got a lot of practice in, you know, just trying to emulate, you know, the great graffiti artists, you know, of the area, you know, of the region rather, you know, New York, New Jersey, and then comic books, you know, and, you know, just copying what, you know, the other, you know, accomplished artists were doing that we were exposed to at the time. But what was happening at the same time was we weren't being encouraged, you know, to pursue art as a career, you know, because obviously that stigma of artists being, you know, starving, you know, was something that was so pervasive in the Black community. You know, we were steered away from it. But that admiration that we have for these guys, you know, and then, you know, there's good times, you know, in Ernest Barnes, how, you know, every episode it seemed like they revealed a new painting, and it was like, whoa, you know, it's like magic, you know. As I got older, my parents moved out of Jersey, moved me south. Oddly enough, my senior year in high school, they moved me south. And it's probably the best thing that could have happened to me, because at that time I was exposed to, I had a friend who opened up a store. You know, he had a little bit of money, you know. His dad opened up a storefront for him where he sold a lot of, you know, sorority apparel and things of that nature. And he asked me just based on a little bit of talent that he knew I had. He asked me to do his sign, for a storefront. And it was crazy, because I bought an airbrush, and and that just sort of reignited that passion I had for art, and I sort of took it from there. Fast forward, I went to school for something practical, college. I went for history. I was a history major. I ended up going to North Carolina Central, which is Ernest Barnes' alma mater. And again, I just started, all these influences, surrounding me, I was growing up in this thing without even realizing it at the time. So pursuing something practical, I stayed on that path, and then I started having children, which can obviously change your perspective on everything, And so one day I'm sitting around, and I'm working a job, and I'm going to school, and I pick up a photo of my little sister, and I just start drawing it on my lunch break. I had a 30-minute lunch break. By the time I finished the drawing, it was 2 hours later, And so I looked up, and I was like, I was like, wow, I get lost in this. If I do this for a living, I'll never work a day in my life, And so at that moment, I changed my major, but again, being driven away from art, from fine art, I thought the practical approach would be to pursue graphic design. And so that's what I did. And that's the profession that I've, kind of lived in as an adult and raising my children. I reached a point about 5 years ago, and I'll cut this short really fast. Reached a point about 5 years ago where I started to pursue this idea of now like pursuing my true passion. It's about seven years ago. And I had met John Holyfield, and that was amazing, to me. And Paul Goodnight, I was exposed to all these guys, and they were just blowing my mind. I was like, that's it, I'm doing that, And that's kind of my story. That's what got me here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing. And I had the opportunity to interview the next gentleman on my radio show this week, and we had a family affair. But I find that actually Thomas Dade is one of our Washingtonians. He actually came up through our arts, studied at the Duke Ellington School of the Arts and Harlem Fine Arts and all of these other fine places. So, Thomas, I'm going to give you an opportunity to share a bit about your beginnings and your soul of art. Thomas Dade.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the introduction. I enjoyed the interview the other day with my family calling in. That was the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me on radio. I must say the beginning for me started before I went to preschool. I had a beautiful grandmother, my mom's mom, Mildred. She worked at the GSA in Washington, D.C., and she sort of manned the computers. So she would bring home reams of paper. And I remember watching Johnny Soccer Robot, and, Godzilla and things like that, and just drawing from my imagination. I had a little sister. However, I played a lot by myself. So, and I look back on that, and I had a really good time doing that. And I remember very early on just creating my own little vignettes. And I think those things, how I started out, pretty much make me who I am today, where I sort of create from my environment and my experiences so that I make it whole for me. Going to Duke Ellington School of the Arts in the 80s, it saved my life because there was a lot of things going on in the streets of Washington, D.C. So Duke saved me, I believe, It came in my life at a very good time where I was able to congregate with other artists and see dancers, musicians, just the whole myriad of creative people, creative souls, if you will. And a lot of them I know today. Through Duke Ellington, I had the honor of working with two Washingtonians. One's a sculptor and architect, John Dreyfus, and who introduced me to Sam. And when I met Sam, that just blew my mind. I mean, all this color, I owe that to the Washington Color School, the only real movement that happened in the Washington, D.C. area during the 60s, where Sam was a champion of doing the drape paintings. So I feel that in my lineage, in my heritage, whereas I was like a whale with like Romare Bearden, and being around Sam during that time, I just took in everything I could. We ate together, we ate lunch together. When the other assistants were on vacation, I was right there and I was raking paintings, raking through paint, seeing paint as a different type of matter and seeing how colors can just transform how you feel at that time. And I felt empowered. But it wasn't until late that I just began to really do my art the way that I wanted. I now think I waited all my life. And I remember when I used to paint with Sam and when I used to sculpt with John, he said, one day you're going to have your own studio, you know. And he always encouraged me to be behind the cameras. And he said, you know, you may have a small space sometimes, but, you know, just do small paintings, do small sculptures, you know, work with what you have until you get what you need, huh? So I owe a lot to some great men from Washington, D.C., from like different spectrums. One man from Kentucky, you know, towering black man from the NAACP, wore overalls. They used to call him Patches, or, you know, it's a great man, and he's doing wonderful today. But I'm just blessed to be here today doing what I can do. And the reason why I'm doing this because I believed in it when I was a kid, and it helped me then. So I'm just going to continue doing it. You know what I mean? I might have a cane. I might be like Henri Matisse and painting from my bed with a long stick. But I might create something great while I'm doing that. So I'm going to just keep doing it, you know? Just keep doing it. Like I'm here with these guys, man. It's like amazing to me. It's like surreal. So I'm going to cut it now, but that's it. Yeah, from my grandmother up to now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we're not going to cut it. We're just going to put a pause on it for a minute. I thank you for that. You know, it's all good and sharing. And, you know, I went through the circle and I waited to end up with you, Dr. Curlee Raven Holton, because, you know, we're talking about a subject matter that's very important. You know, ever since the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, there's been a resurgence. There's been a resurgence of a cycle that we've been through time and time again, whether it was Rodney King or, you know, any other incident that we've had, Emmett Till, in every era, we have another incident, such as the incident we just experienced last year, only a little beyond a 1-year anniversary of an ultimate lynching. The lynching isn't always by rope, but we have these conversations afterwards. And I've been around for a few, and I've experienced many cycles from the civil rights movement until today. And as a witness, I can say that this year and this cycle probably brings about what I feel to be the best opportunity to quote unquote change the narrative. You know, they always talk about if you don't write the story, then the story will continue to be likened to those who are writing the stories. And I think that the title of this program, Black Art Changing the Narrative of Black Fatherhood, One Positive Image at a Time, is very, very important, which is why I waited to have you, Dr. Holton, give your beginnings and your soul of art last, so that you can then kick us off into the discussion about, from a historical or from a perspective, an inside perspective, of how important it is and how important art is in changing the narrative and telling the narrative and into telling the story. But let me allow you to give your bio and your beginnings first, if you will.
Well, let me first say that I'm inspired by the different stories about how each of you got started in your careers. Very similar in my case. As a young kid, I watched my brother draw and imitated my older brother. I had teachers in school that encouraged me, and as David said, I would do a similar experience. I would make little images, and I was very good at it. And in my own personal experience and sense of making art, I was more successful at dating young girls, because I was an artist. So that was very attractive. So that was important to me at that time. And I didn't have any real understanding what it meant to be an artist until much later. I'm what they call a Ben Arrow, in the sense that it took me quite a while to come to this notion of art. I got drafted into the military during Vietnam, and I did art when I was in the military and received some recognition for that. And I think that began to encourage me to believe that it might be possible, but I still had no notion of what it meant to be an artist. And after being released from the military, I began to go to college and went on in business, and then switched to fine arts. And I met a professor walking down the hallway by the name of Edward Parker, a black sculptor from Cleveland, Ohio. And that's where I grew up, in Cleveland, Ohio. And he asked me to come to see him one evening and visit his class, which I did. And I was inspired by what he was doing. This was the first African-American artist that I had met. And you have to understand, I hadn't been introduced to real art other than in a classroom setting. Well, he inspired me and introduced me to artists like Michael Harris and other artists, practitioners in the Cleveland area. Later on, I was able to go to New York City to study with Robert Blackburn, the famous printmaker, by way of an arrangement to Elizabeth Catlett. I had met Elizabeth Catlett and began to correspond with her. And later on, I printed her work. But I went on to New York City, and one afternoon there was a phone call from Lafayette College looking for an African-American candidate for a new position. Also, someone that had published in African-American art and art history, and I was self-taught in regards to African-American art history and culture. And I was writing about it and about my thoughts about it and how I saw African-American culture as a way of expressing our humanity and our philosophical and existential realities as well. Well, they offered me the position, and that's where I began working with my printmaking, established the Experimental Printmaking Institute, and began to work with Faith Ringo, Sam Gilliam, Mel Edwards, William T. Williams, Elizabeth Catlett, so many African-American artists that I worked with. And over time, those relationships also gave me a clear identity and understanding what it meant to be an artist and the important role that an African-American creative person has. But one thing that strikes me about the stories that each of you told is that moment that you chose to be an artist, not just recognizing that you had talent or you thought it would be entertaining or fun to pursue art, but to choose to be an artist. And that is a very serious choice from my perspective, because with it has certain implications, a certain kind of struggle. It could be an endeavor with no public recognition, no public acceptance, no validation, but a belief and a faith in what you have to say as a creative person. And making a choice is important. And for an artist to have any audience, I think is extremely fortunate, and to be successful. 1%. Actually, only 1% of practicing artists are successful, able to support themselves. So it is a great choice, a very powerful choice. And as Emma Amos would say, when she walked into the studio and would pick up a paintbrush, it was a revolutionary act for a person of color. So I'll stop at that moment.
Okay. A good moment to stop at, for sure. You know, you mentioned that you actually were printing art, and you mentioned some people, some artists whom you actually printed, whose artists you printed their works. And you know, we're just getting past the 100th anniversary of Tulsa, the Black Wall Street. And I had a cousin who has another radio show, and he said, I want to talk about that, but how did they get all of that property? How did they come into that? There was a realtor who thought that it would be good to provide an opportunity for these business people to have access to land at lower rates. And he made it possible for folks to garner these properties in a certain section of town and to create that entrepreneurial kind of space. And I feel that those who print art, and especially print art in different forms, and those who make it possible for artists to create, those who know me know that I'm affiliated with Gateway CDC, a community development corporation, and we provide studios to more than 30 some odd artists in the district at low rates because they generally can't afford high rates. And we run out and we find all these grants to supplement their rent so that they can continue to do their art. So I'd like for you, as we dovetail, to talk about the importance and significance of that which you provide, which is the production of the art. That's one of the things in the many phases of your career that you provided, but I think it's very significant. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about it.
I started off as a printmaker at the Institute of Art, where I was getting my BFA. Yes. And the thing that happened is many artists in Cleveland of color were asked to produce a print to be sold to benefit the ANC in South Africa. This was before the end of apartheid. So these prints would be used to buy weapons for the ANC. So I was determined to participate. I had never made a print. And the idea of the print was that you could sell multiples and allow them to generate income. So I did my first print in the evening, covertly at the Institute with the help of some other students. And that print was my first introduction to two really important elements about fine printmaking in the African-American tradition, was the accessibility, that by producing a fine print, more than one person could acquire that work, and normally they were at more affordable prices. The second thing, it is the most democratic form of art making because it's made with the intention of being shared with the community. Also, it built my reputation within that community of Cleveland. And after many years, I was so successful in the city as an African-American artist that I was more successful than any white artist in the city of Cleveland, and had a larger studio than any white artist in the city of Cleveland. So white artists have never been my model to aspire to in terms of its success, studio, or even career aspirations, to be honest with you, because I had these experiences. And one of the first role models I had was Nelson Stevens. Many of you may know who Nelson Stevens is. He was my junior high school teacher. And my teacher during my BFA studies at the Cleveland Institute of Art was Mo Booker. So I was around artists, African-American artists at that point, that were asserting themselves as relevant and viable and had something to say. So that was very important. So the printmaking medium allowed me to express myself to that larger community. And I began to collaborate with artists. And the first artist I did a formal collaboration with was Faith Ringo. And then following Faith Ringo was Sam Gilliam. And I produced probably over a dozen editions with Sam, 40 different editions with Faith, and over 40 with David Driskell. And I was David's master printer until he died last year, of course. So I've worked with many, Emma Amos. I mean, there's so many that I worked with. But one point I do want to make clear here is this tradition of the African-American printmaking is historically important. The first classified and qualified African-American master printmaker was Robert Blackburn at the printmaking workshop in New York State.
All right.
One was Ron Adams out of California and later in Atlanta, Georgia. The third would have been Lou Stovall, and many of you know Lou Stovall from Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Only African-American master printmaker that is also a publisher. I own the only fine art publishing company in the country owned by an African-American. I'm talking about fine art. I'm not talking about declays or digital prints. I'm talking about
I understand.
museum prints.
Yes.
So Along the way, it's a celebration of culture and identity and collaboration with artists, but it's always focused on one primary motive, is to share our creativity with our community, to share it with the world, and to speak our truth. You talked about the dynamics that we face as African Americans with racism and violence. Bob Marley's great song, All I Have Is My Redemption Song. That is something that we have had ever since we've been on North American shores, is the redemption song. And that redemption song will continue. And what I mean by that, this is just another period of time in which we must confront who we are and where we are in North America. This is a unique, racialized experience that's in the blood, in the soil of this country. And it's obvious, it should be obvious to all of us that that is a battle that we are challenged with and must fight. So I'm really honored to be here with you to talk about this and celebrate our history, and especially to honor Dr. Driskell's legacy, who created that first major exhibition that established the foundation in the study of African American art, 200 years of Black American art. But another issue, and maybe we won't talk about it on this occasion, is the title of this particular panel discussion, this idea of Black art. We must make sure we have ownership of that definition and that is not being imposed upon us. What does it mean to say that I am a Black artist and I make Black art? What does that really mean? And who's controlling that narrative and that story?
Mm-hmm. And I think that is a perfect segue to Larry Poncho Brown, because I'm looking at your quote, Larry, and you've mentioned the African American art realm has been pressing onward because of the positive images that have become a narrative of our perseverance. My works attempt to capture soul while purposely depicting positive representations of African American culture. Art and imagery are the strongest forms to challenge the perceptions of African Americans in our society. Expound upon that, and in light of what Dr. Holton just said, I just think there's a connectivity there, which is why I just moved over to you. Please elaborate. You're on mute, Larry. And I'll go back.
Thank you for that reminder.
Sure.
All these things and all these stories are connected. I think that we all go different routes to achieve sharing our works with our community. I think that we're at a point in time now where there are so many divisions in art alone, let alone African American art or Black art or whatever term you want to use, that we have to realize that at some point, what are we doing? Who are we catering to? Who is the story being shown to? I admire Mr. Holton and his history because for the longest time watching Mr. Blackburn and other people, and I've personally met Ron Adams. I've been to his studio when he was in Santa Fe to see the mission that they have to produce this work is really magical. And traditionally, it was only dealt with through academia. Most HBCUs and other institutions, that was the method that artists, it was a sole method of getting your work reproduced and seen by some people. Okay, technology hadn't really affected the flow of how works were produced through 1960, 1970, and 1980. There was a major revolution that happened in 1980 where things really got confusing. And when I say confusing, the notion of accessibility is a question. Like Mr. Holton said, that his job was to try to get this work within his community. Well, with the advent of Good Times and the Cosby Show, a new revolution began. And underneath of that was a technical revolution that was happening. So suddenly, where artists could only rely on traditional printmaking to do work, now it was possible for them to go a commercial route to do offset lithography. And we won't even mention G. Clay because at that point, G. Clay wasn't even around. And so you're talking about a host of artists, some of the artists that were mentioned in the panel already with Paul Goodnight, Charles Bibbs, and a whole host of other contemporary artists that didn't traditionally get notoriety through academia, began this trek to really make art affordable to the masses, and so that movement was very, very important. I think that when you talk to each artist and you see what the content of the work is, the one thing we've always done has been mirrors to what's happening in our culture. But this whole notion of accessibility and how it's utilized is a bigger question for me. Um, I watched from 1985 to 2005 one of the biggest revolutions that I have seen since the Harlem Renaissance. And that was watching African American artists, Black artists, whatever term you want to use, begin to be able to succeed and be successful as full-time artists. And I'm talking about artists at the top of the game, Joe Holton, Paul Goodnight, it's a whole, I could list probably 150 artists that came through that period of time, with the central asset being that they were going into communities, venues were open in the communities, shows were beginning to open in the communities. The art business as a whole began this, they even created a genre of African American / Black art, because prior to 1980, certain factions recognized African American art, but it wasn't a true genre. And so, because of the catalyst that happened with the Good Times era and the Cosby era, this new revolution happened where art was accessible. And you're talking about millions and millions of people and millions of homes that began hanging artwork, who may not have been known who Elizabeth Catlett was, who may not have known the artists that came, our masters that came through that generation. Also, what happened was that because it was a bridge between the two generations, I got to meet Elizabeth Catlett. I got to meet Jacob Lawrence. It was just a crossover. I got to meet Ernie Barnes. So as we talk about this whole subject of changing the narrative, we have to remember that art has always been here for us since we got here 400 years ago. And we were doing it whether we were doing it secretly or not. But as we became more civilized in this country, now we have these different gateways to get artwork in our community. And the subject matter that we choose is so pivotal. And this whole thing of what's happening with this resurgence, I like that word, because George Floyd did create a resurgence. There was a movement created beyond the civil rights movement called Black Art Matters. We were going through a very volatile political time. And then we got hit with this COVID circumstance that really made us go, okay, number one, I need to really start buying Black again. Number two, I'm really tired of what's happening with our people and the image of our people and the destruction of our people. And it's affected what's happening in the arts. When I was coming through between 1985 and 2005, trying to sell artworks that had any kind of civil rights movement vibe to it, wasn't really selling. And now we're at a point where people are so sensitized politically, socially, and spiritually that now social justice pieces are beginning to sell like they've never sold before. And I think that each one of these things piggyback off of each other. And so if it wasn't for the work of Curlee, Holton, and Robert Blackburn and all those guys that were, and all of our masters that were doing works that were reflective of their times anyway, the revolution that happened in 1985 to 2005 would have never happened. And so I think that we need to remember to continue to form these bridges, because right after that period ended, there's a new generation of artists coming along that need the information from both of those prior generations.
Yeah, Poncho, I just want to say sometimes we forget about that legacy and about those influences and that foundation that we're standing on. Sometimes we forget and we think we're our own invention, that we somehow are the author of our own realities and the master of the universe, and not a combination of those influences and opportunities presented. As you said, Jacob Lawrence made it possible for you. Catlett made it possible for me. David Driskell made it possible for me and for others. Those achievements, those trailblazers, influenced us and created a foundation for us. And I think that's real important.
I was speaking before, talking about absolutely, and I'm glad that you jumped in, Dr. Holton, to pick up on that, because I feel that whether we're artists, whether we're directing programs, whatever it is that we're doing right now, we have a responsibility to take this period and to take hold of our narrative and to do with it what needs to be done. And so I think with that, it's a good time to go back to you, um, Mr. Cassidy, Elder Cassidy. And it's something that you mentioned in your bio and in your narrative. You said that it is the spirit of the artist that makes art truly live. Art that comes out of the raw spirit and soul of the artist is far more useful than that which is merely the technical manipulation of substances. And you mentioned that what you want people to do is to stop and stare and discover what's hidden in your artwork. You said, I want to make sure your eyes work at searching out the story. I actually own a few of your pieces, and, you know, I had so much fun sitting in front of one of your pieces and finding all the history that I would bring people over to actually see if they saw it too. So tell us a little bit about that and about the rawness of what comes from the soul as compared to what is manipulated through systems and mechanisms. And then about how you like for people to view your art.
Well, I've always thought that that art can be the manipulation of technique. I noticed that some people have a formula, and they can repeat that formula over and over again to come up with different kinds of artwork. I've never been able to do that. If you ask me to repeat it, it would never look like it did the first time. The first time I was sitting down and I was doing a painting, my father's girlfriend at the time, I didn't even know they were married, but they were married. You know, once I got on Ancestry, I found out that they got married. But she asked me to do something for her studio. She had lupus. And so she wanted me to do something with exercise to music. So the one thing I thought of was just doing all of these different images, uh, interacting, laying over each other, and what have you, and then painting them full of colors. I did that on a black background. And what happened, it came out so flat and uninteresting. So I wanted to see how I could make it live. So what I did was I started painting a whole lot of squares behind it, a lot of colorful squares. And then it caused the dancers to be absorbed into the squares, but you could still see them if you looked hard enough. Now, somebody came along and offered her $1,000 for that painting. I don't know if she sold it or what. I don't know what happened to it. But I thought, wow, you mean I could make some money doing this? So that was interesting to me. But that was something that I felt to do. I had no teaching or learning to do that. Then I noticed one thing. I didn't grow up with my mother. So I met my mother shortly after I started painting. And my mother was discovered by Sammy Nicely, who did sculptures, face masks, and different things that some of you all may know him, may not. But he was excellent at it. He discovered my mother. My mother would paint on any and everything. She'd paint on the bathroom walls, the tubs, wood, lampshades, and different things of that nature. But I noticed that her perspective, once I began to really learn what perspective is, her perspective was not in one or two dimensions. I mean, she could paint in a painting. You could be looking up at one point, looking down, looking crosswise, looking another direction, and it would all be in the one frame. And so they called these persons, because they were untrained, outsider artists. I thought it was so interesting that a person can see in those dimensions all at the same time in one plain field. Now, what I discovered is that she was doing something that Greg Ridley from Fisk used to call memory art. A person was painting from the memory, what they grew up with, what they thought about, what was on their mind, and what have you. My mother never had an art class. Matter of fact, I didn't know that she was painting. She didn't know I was painting. So we kind of grew up in the art differently. But hers was titled folk art. And her perspective was such that once you had learned the dimensions and the focus of line and how to do line, how to do circles, how to do depth, how to do shadows, and things of that nature. Once you have learned how to do that, you can't look at folk artists or folk art the same way. You can't reproduce it because you have lost some of that. I don't even know what you call it. You lost some of that. And I hear the word in there, primitive,
Mm-hmm.
primitiveness of focus.
Okay.
So I knew a friend of mine. Her name was Barbara Bullock. She was a architect. Then she had a stroke, so she couldn't do architecture anymore. But she started painting as part of her physical therapy, and her work was absolutely phenomenal. She found a formula, and her work that used to they called it so strident and different things of that nature because when she painted, it was so pointed, it was so in your face. Okay, there's no tact to it at all, and so her work was absolutely phenomenal. But because she had the technical aspect of being an architect, she could draw in all dimensions within the correct field or plane or dimension, or however you could do that very colorfully, and tell a story that would be phenomenal. And the reason being is because she could see it that way. She had the technical skills to do it. Now, the difference between her and my mother did not have the technical skills. So when she did it, it appeared very raw and primitive. When Barbara did it, it appeared very technical, but it also told the story because she was a very vocal person. But her voice now was in her art, not just in her vocabulary. And so I tend to think that, that sometimes when we learn too much technique, we lose some of the primitiveness in the artwork. Now I'll say this, and then I'll stop. I went to Africa in 1989. Two things I saw that was very interesting. That I would go into the monasteries of the Coptic Church, and people there couldn't read, so they would paint the images all on the inside of the church, and they would tell the story of the Gospels by the paintings that were on the walls. And the people could come in and then tell the story about the paintings through what they saw in the colors and stuff. Then the other thing I saw was the artist who did soapstone sculptures. I'm sure you've heard of the Zimbabwe artists and the Shona artwork and what have you. And the way that they could see and look into that stone and create those images came out of a technical primitiveness because they knew how to manipulate the stone. They knew how to get the image, but they also knew how to distort the image so that the images would be perfect in their distortion, if I might say it that way. So that's why I say that there's a difference between looking at somebody who has gone to art school in Atlanta or something like that, and they sculpture, and it's a perfect feature. It's different from the Greek. The Greeks were very good sculptors, but the Shona sculptures show a different kind of feeling and mood and artistry and history and a sort of a griotness behind their technique. So that's why I say it like that. It's something that comes from the gut, that comes from the heart, that makes the artwork tell the same story in a different kind of way.
All right. All right. Well, you gave us a nice segue. We're looking to focus again on this narrative because we want to know about how we are using Black art to change the narrative. And I know that it's the narrative of Black fatherhood, one positive image at a time. And I think it's really critically important that we focus on how Black art can and is and will change the narrative. So I'm going to actually segue over to you, Thomas, to talk a little bit about that topic of how Black art can and will and is changing the narrative one positive image at a time.
Mute. You're on mute.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so most importantly, I think it's just continue the creative process. You know, I once read a quote by a guy named Swiss Beats, into music, and he's a big old art collector, right? So he sort of deemed us as the creative force, like we're gonna like the new hip hop artists, if you will. So we have this, social network with Instagram and being able to share images. It sort of made everyone want to be an artist. It's almost like when you're rapping, you got the beat behind you and the force is with you and you're riding the wave. Well, a lot of people are finding that they are creative in so many different ways right now. So at the same time, people like Amy Sherald and Kende Wiley doing these magnificent things on this national, worldwide scope that you can't deny that it happened. It's like an overflow. And we're going into the boroughs of places in New York and me here in this DC area and all these other areas. As long as we keep doing it, we change the narrative because the force is going to be, and it is undeniable now. It's like we have conversations now. Now we're putting the pieces together with the historical context of everything. And it's so important. I know that Larry does a lot of community outreach where he pulls in and does a lot of coaching, but that's what we need because without, a lot of the mentorships and the process of educating the community and letting them know that there are different ways that we can relate our emotions, we can release ourselves. We as Black people have a way of going through things in a beautiful, painful way when we look back at it and be like, we did that. And every day that we wake up, we constantly say, we did that. Now, more so with so many threats to our lives, just like playing out like we're in some type of play. It's like surreal. So, without this creative force and this thing that's burning inside of us, since everyone has a gift, it's just a matter of tapping into it. But just like music, we as Black artists, we just show what was impossible and we can do it. We've always found a way of working with what we have, to get what we need, and it just grows just like a snowball going down the hill. So as long as I feel like me as a father and being a Black man, a granddaughter I have, you know, the fact that she came into my studio and she picked up a brush and took it straight to the canvas, it showed me, wow, that's how early on I was really collecting this data. So she is like confirmation to keep on going. And that's pretty much it, man. We just a living representation of, you know, the legacy of our ancestors, man. It's just that way. And as long as we stay true to it, man, we won't lose. God is my witness, and God is what I'm a spiritual man, if you will, and that's where a lot of my motivation and my emotions come through my art. because that's what keeps me grounded, because I could have been gone a long time ago, a couple of times. So I'm very grateful to God above on this beautiful Sunday that I'm able to be here, expressing this gift of mine. I'm privileged to be here. I thank God for that. Thank you very much. Huh?
Miss Thornton, I want to add something to what Thomas was saying.
Please do.
Most of the time when we start to reflect as artists on the subject matter that we portray, or there's different storylines that are happening, the different narratives that are happening, that they very seldom really touch on fatherhood.
Yes.
They touch on perseverance, they touch on struggle, can even speak to triumph, but they don't speak on fatherhood. I'm gonna tell you something that's really strange. That period I was telling you about from 1985 to 2005, there may have been 2% of artworks that depicted father and children. I didn't say mother and children. I didn't say children by themselves. I said father and children. When we have this dialogue, people really are curious about what we are doing to really embrace that narrative, because I know more good fathers than I know bad fathers. I know more guys that are with their families than are not with their family. There's so many things we would have to paint an entire lifetime to redirect some of the truths that's happening in our community. Okay. But I really want to start with that one point and that one question. How can we have a young man in our house, and we're cultured enough to put artwork on the walls, but have not one picture in the house that's a representation of who he is? So for me, we have a lot of work to do still. Artists are not doing anything new by capturing the struggle that's happening in our community. We have always done that. I don't care what era you came from, your work is just as pertinent and just as relevant to the times as it is now. But we do have specific issues now that we can address in a totally different way. And having young men depicted in our art and and children in their art is very important. And I have really taken strides to produce images like that in this last 2 decades.
And that's greatly appreciated. In fact, Poncho, I actually saw your I was about to come to you because I could feel your affirming feeling for what Thomas was saying, as I saw Levi doing the same while you were speaking. So instead of having Levi, let me come to you, because I saw the same kind of affirming nod as Larry Poncho Brown was speaking. So let me give you an opportunity to dovetail without interrupting the flow.
Well, yeah, I agree. I agree with, everything that's just been stated. For me, everything that I do, as a father, is driven, by that role. Like, that's the most important role that I play. So, whenever I approach a canvas, I'm thinking about, what lesson or what can I expose, my children to, through this work. What narratives can I speak to? How can I, sort of draw these ideas that I try to convey to them through words? How can I now, place that on canvas and try to reach them in a different way? And by extension, reach their generation in a different way. And it's quite a challenge. And I feel like that's just, that's a huge responsibility that we bear as artists. I've never been a fan of, like landscape art. I feel like being an artist is an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to have a conversation. It's an opportunity to spark dialogue. It's an opportunity to, to encourage reflection. And, I was introduced through this pandemic. A brother gave me an opportunity that I'll forever be grateful for. And he introduced me into this, the public art space. And the most interesting thing that I found about, making that transition from studio art to, to being in the public, in the public space was how you're presenting work to people who weren't invited, right? Someone's riding down the street, someone's walking down the street, they look up, and here you are. You know, what occurred to me was that's a moment to say something, right? And you have a very small window to say it. You know, they're at the stoplight, you got 2 minutes, they're gone, you know, but that image rides down the road with them, you know. So what are you going to do with that? And so, you know, again, I just think, you know, that in so many ways, you know, it's kind of a responsibility that we bear, you know, to depict, you know, images, one, like, you know, like Poncho was saying, depict positive images of fatherhood and sort of, you know, change this narrative. You know, we have opportunities to change this narrative of who we are as, you know, as Black people, you know, whether it be communicating, you know, ideas about, you know, social injustice, or whether it's just communicating ideas about how the world lands on us as people, you know, whatever the topic may be. I had to come out initially to address COVID, you know, with murals. And the language that we speak is different, you know, the way that we communicate is different. And we can talk about being able to overcome something that no one has ever experienced before. We're all going through, you know, and going through that pandemic, it leveled the playing field. We were all experiencing the same challenge, you know, the same adversity. And we had an opportunity as artists to address that adversity through our language.
Sure.
You know, and, you know, those are my thoughts, you know, as it relates to what we say.
Pat, can I contribute to that?
Please do.
You know, it's in my own personal case, I've been doing self-portraits since I was about 18 years old, and I'll be 70 at the end of this month. So I do a continual series of self-portraits because I want to document my existence for egotistical reasons, but for my children and my grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that has been important to me, you know, it's important to have professional success, to have your work in museum collections and museum exhibits and those kinds of things, and the sale work. But for me, one of the most important things is for my children and grandchildren to interact with me as an artist, as a creative artist. So my granddaughter will walk into the studio and look at a painting and watch me work, or a painting I've done of her, and she'll say, "That's me. That's Ananda. That's me." So this relationship that I have to them as an artist is really significant, coming from a history of having a father that was a factory worker, and you have no relationship to his individual choice as a creative individual. He's working, he's supporting his family, and most people are doing this. 95% of people are doing that. Only a small percentage are choosing to follow their own path, their own individual path. And on this panel, you have 5 of us that have chosen to do that. And I think that's a heck of a celebration, but it's an excellent symbol. So it's not just a painting that you make. It is also, the painting is a metaphor. The art object is a metaphor of your feeling, your inspiration, your insight, and whatever story you're telling. We are also the metaphor. The practicing artist is also someone that stands for freedom of creativity, freedom of expression, self-determination, entrepreneurship, a whole range of things. And to show that to your children and your community as a choice is amazing. And everyone should be complimented for that. And it is not without risk as well.
Absolutely. This is just wonderful when you all chime in when I'm about to come to you, because I was about to come to you, Dr. Holton, to say, I'm actually in New York City, and I was here for a wedding. And as you say, Poncho, I know more good fathers than I know bad fathers. And I had 5 sisters, and I have several nephews, but all of we girls created a whole bunch of boys. And I looked at my nephews yesterday, and they're all very, very, very present and very involved with their children. And I'm very proud of all of my nephews. And I wonder how we change the image, the narrative. Larry, you mentioned that we need to have the positive images. And Dr. Holton, you've mentioned that we have to share. Either of you or any of you, what are the other things that we need to do to make sure that we're influencing through art? What's the influencing? And I know, Dr. Holton, you mentioned that the art itself is a metaphor, but Poncho, you also mentioned accessibility, and access to art is very important. And Levi, you mentioned it's all about perspective and catching folks. When you talked about that traffic light, I thought about the young people today. You have about the amount of seconds that you have when somebody's sitting at a traffic light to influence some of these young people, but I think they're ready. So one of you can tell us what we need to do to jump into this opportunity that exists for us right now to share and enlighten. Who's going? Is it you?
Yeah, I think everybody's ready.
Everybody wants to chime into this one. Okay. All right, I'm going to start with you, Poncho, because many of your quotes triggered what I was saying, and we'll go over to Levi and David and everybody else. This will be our little clip. Go ahead.
Okay.
Let's do this in 1 or 2 minutes each person.
The first thing I want to do is I want to apologize to all of you that are watching, that are hearing us try to relay as best we can what it's like to be an image maker and to take responsibility for creating the art. Because really the subject here today, I believe, is this narrative of changing the narrative of Black fatherhood. And for me, each artist is telling from their spirit how they approach doing their work. But for me, I think it's important that I do a certain percentage of my concepts wrapped around young boys, young men, and the guardianship of young men. I have thousands of other images that portray the different markets, and artists have the ability to really paint whatever they want, okay? But what happens when you make the charge to do images to counteract the narrative? Let's take, for instance, right now. More pictures are being painted of George Floyd than of just young men. You know, we're tackling that topic, and he's the poster child for that thing that happened. There are literally thousands of people that have gone through that same thing, but artists now are levitating to doing pictures of Breonna Taylor, and that's the current vibe. Okay, that's still an example for me, because there's still a way to do an image that has a young male that can still tell that same story and that same concern about police brutality. And so I think that as artists, we are image makers. I'll never forget that Paul Goodnight said to me once that we're image makers and we have to take real responsibility for what we paint. And for the longest time, I never wanted to be in a box of painting for a community or painting for a person or painting a particular style for money. But I think we're at this particular period where we have to realize that artists have an innate power to change that. And if we can all devote time to making sure that the Black male doesn't fall out of art, then I think we've started on the right path.
I think
there we go.
Go
ahead, David. I'll let you go ahead, David.
What he just said is to make sure the Black male doesn't fall out of art. Now, I remember growing up, I've never seen anything like Black male angels. Saw white male angels. I don't recall seeing a whole lot of father pictures, unless it was that old man in the sky pointing his finger at somebody else, you know, that one. So I decided that when I started painting pictures that were depictions of me and my two boys. I started doing that. Two boys with their dad at the park. Two boys sitting in a family of persons. Then I decided when my father died to do a painting of him, and it was called In Search of My Father's World, where I tried to capture the stories that he either told me or that we saw together growing up, you know, in the media what have you. My father once told me he would never go back down south because of his experiences there. So I captured that in a picture to get an image of what he told me so that I could keep telling the stories and tell my sons the stories. Now, one of the things that I believe is that image in art is very important because I like to say it like this: we are who we image in ourselves to be, or who we imagine ourselves to be. So artists have to expand the imagination as well as talk about the current situations, but expand the imagination. I didn't do George Floyd because everybody's doing George Floyd. That was not going to be of any benefit for me to do another George Floyd. But to be able to show, I took different images from different places and created one called Fathers, Sons, and Ancestors because I wanted them to see the whole history of how Black fathers and Black maleness came to be, not just from the point of having been enslaved, but we had great nations prior to that. Okay, we had the old men who would sit down with the younger boys and they would talk with them about what it meant to be a man. At 12 years old, you had to go run across the back of cows or something like that to show your brain.
All right.
I would still be a little boy today.
All
I
right.
had to run on the back of cows. But those kinds of things that we can show where you go from or transition from the boy image to the man image and have that image be a positive image that shows the creative genius of who we are as a people.
That is certainly true. That is certainly true. I want to get Levi and Thomas's reaction to that real quickly. We have so Levi, please share your comment on that.
Okay. Interestingly enough, there are two images that are used, for my bio, in this, for this particular panel, and one of them is I entitled Little Man, and it's this little guy, who has these great big, glasses on and this great big, this great big hat, and and he looks like he's wearing like his dad's hat and his, his uncle's, glasses, and so what that painting is talking about is this little guy who's in a hurry to grow up. And not only is he in a hurry to grow up, but in the Black community, society forces him to grow up early, And the second image is a painting that I did. That's a part of a new series that I'm doing. It's called Hip Hop Heads. And in that particular painting, I'm talking about the sort of this this dilemma that the Black man is faced with, and it's hip hop. There was a period in hip hop when it was so misogynistic and so ultra masculine that men rappers couldn't even allude to the fact that they like girls. They had to somehow degrade them, or whatever, and that was the accepted norm. And then Rakim took the lead when he did a cameo on a Jody Watley song, and they called that crossing over, and it was met with such vitriol, but it changed the narrative for hip hop, and it changed the narrative for this concept of what masculinity had to look like, And so now everybody was doing cameos and everybody was, crossing over into R&B. And so with those two paintings, what I was attempting to do was talk about these issues without, I don't like insulting, my audience. I don't have to do a painting of Rakim.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Understood.
Yeah, so instead of doing that, I try to allow the viewer to see themselves, in these images,
and that's really important.
Yeah, it's not about the it's not about the celebrity. It's about the concept. It's about what they represented in that moment. And I try to use hip hop again, reaching to a younger audience, and that's the thing that kind of unites, the past two generations. I would say. Absolutely. At least the past two. It's hip,
Absolutely.
you know, and so
And
I kind of lean into that.
I
So I
appreciate
think
that. And I
that-
hate to interrupt you a bit, but we have like a little about 11 minutes left, and I want to get Thomas in. And from Thomas, you don't have to stop. Dr. Holton, we'll ask you a question right after that. So Thomas,
Okay.
I want you to give your response as well. Oh, you're
Black.
muted. You're muted. You're
Oh,
muted.
yeah. Let me see.
You're okay
You
now.
got it. Oh, take it back off.
There
There
we
you go.
are.
Hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Wonderful conversation we're having. Speaking in terms of the importance of being a father, uh, when your son begins to acquire your work and commissions you to do things that he's inspired of and by, um, that matters to me as a father. Everything I do so that I could have a memory of positiveness left for my children and those who love me and those who I loved in this realm. So let's say, for instance, this painting here. Oh, it wasn't that one. It's that one over there. This one I did. I was going through something that was kind of traumatic for me, and it started out with like an ink drawing, right? And my kids are grown, but it was like.
Yeah, we could see
I
it. Yeah.
Yeah, this was like, this male figure who's taking care of his children. He has them in his bosom, you know. Uh, I we as artists, we do have a responsibility, This painting here is based on like Adam and Eve, with so many things of not knowing your ABCs and what go together, what doesn't. Sometimes it's good to break it down and bring it back down to parts that I can understand. And so changing the narrative, being a black man, being a father, is just like I'm just trying to stay authentic and to continue to create and put my images out there. And first and foremost, I create because I want to, because
Hmm.
it's what I love to do. It just so happens that I may create it and I may share it and someone likes it. It's a beautiful thing, when you're able to share it, you
Yeah.
know. And so I'm just going to continue doing what I do and keep my children in mind, keep my loved ones in mind. And that's the fuel. And we come back around again and we do it over again. It's a cycle,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. And thanks for sharing that piece.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that piece. Um,
Yes.
Dr. Holton, we're gonna go back over to Larry Poncho Brown. Poncho, you want to share something? I see it because this is an image. Go ahead. Take yourself off of mute, dear Poncho.
I was just trying to get the light from bouncing off of it, but this is
Okay.
a bamboo plate that I painted.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an example of how I'm making strides to change that narrative. This piece is a son and a father. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, the title of this piece is The Truth Teller. And so I'm beginning to do pieces that are abstract. I'm doing more pieces that are incorporating Black males back into pieces. I think that that's kind of everything I do is a testimony to my family. And that's the legacy I'm going to leave behind in my work. But I still am challenging even younger artists to deal with this imaging issue. 80% to 90% of the images on the African American art market are of women, and we know why, because they are the culture keepers. The remaining of those pieces are done of children because children represents tomorrow. My big question again, if I have to be redundant, is if we have to really look at what we're doing with the fatherhood issue in our pieces.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, that is a perfect note to end that whole cycle on, and to challenge not only the artists that are on the panel, but you all are doing what's necessary, but to extend that to the communities and to have that at the forefront of your mind. We received one question while we were on the air, and Dr. Holton, I'd like for you to answer it in a minute. And then we're going to do a rapid round so that everyone can have a little closing note for about 15 seconds. But our question was about preservation, Dr. Holton, about the importance of preservation and how do we preserve. I know that Poncho spoke to accessibility and everything, but I figured that you would have at least a note for us on preservation of Black art.
Well, we at the Driskell Center have hosted 2 what we call collector schools. And we bring in collectors, estate planners, archivists, attorneys, artists as well, to talk about specific types of artwork. And the goal is to introduce that not only to established collectors, but those that are beginning collectors, in some cases, individuals that haven't even started collecting. But the ideal is that you also have objects in your own family, heirlooms in your own family that need to be preserved and protected. And let's make sure we understand that if we assume that these objects are valuable, even the making of art, the pursuing of artistic careers are a valuable aspiration, then we need to treat those objects as if they are valuable. We need to document those objects, we need to assess those objects, and we need to be able to, in some cases, appraise those objects so that we understand the value, not just personal value, but value in the marketplace for estate planning. I'm not advancing the ideal that an art object should just be thought in terms of the financial instrument, but an estate object, what you are transferring to your children and your descendants, is very valuable. Not only preserving it, but having a real informed knowledge about it. One part of this collector's school that we presented was a discussion about what we call smart art. Is thinking about art as you would literature. We know smart, insightful, knowledgeable authors. We know authors that are making pulp fiction, popular writings that don't have the same level of quality or intellectual insight or skill or knowledge. We need to think about art that way also, and we shouldn't be afraid of critique. What is also missing in the art world right now, generally, but specifically for African American art, is there's no mechanism for honest, thoughtful, considerate critique. We are comfortable with press releases, descriptions by authors that are compensated to write for us, but very few occasions do you see any mindful, thoughtful, honest critique of a body of work or of an artist. And I think until we have that, a lot of what we're doing is romanticized. It's produced for good feelings rather than a sense of awareness and consciousness. And that can be painful. Art can be beautiful, but art also, and honest, but art also can be painful because it brings us to a level of consciousness. And sometimes consciousness requires that we are reflective, thoughtful, and that we accept our understandings and are able to change. And art can be a provocative element for that. Art can advance that. Art can also predict the future. Many artists have done creative works that have come into a realization of foretelling the future. And these kind of art objects are not just pretty pictures on the wall, but can be threatening sometimes because they're so honest and uncomfortable. And that needs to be present also. So a serious critique, a serious understanding of what you have, provenance, letters of authenticity so you can document the work. And one of the great ways of doing that is to interact with the artist directly, to visit the artist studio, to get to know the artist, to develop a personal relationship so that you can understand the value of the work and what the work was really about. It's very important.
Thank you so much for tackling that question for us and handling that. I knew you would have the perspective and the answer for us. And time has been dwindling down, and I mentioned the time that we have, but our producers have allowed me not to rush you into a 15-second closing, if you will. This is just getting to the heart of the matter, and I didn't want to prevent anyone who had some burning comment to add to the discussion that we're having right now, because it's just, I hear you. I see you over there. Poncho, please, go ahead. See, because I could feel it. So I'm glad they felt it too. Go ahead.
Okay. Art is a small word that means a lot of things. I think what I fear most is the elitism that is creeping into the arts. We can have these sophisticated discussions about how to govern art, but I'm also watching grassroots people get involved in the arts like they never did before. And we need to really sit down now and start talking to people about what they collect and how they govern what they collect, long before we start talking about how to archive what they have. I have people right now that bought works back in 1985 who are 30 years out, who retired, and the work transferred to their children, and their children have no interest in art. And so that artwork ends up in storage containers and thrift shops and other things. They're beginning collectors that come in who think the art is theirs, and they don't talk to their children so that it's inclusive, so that they know it is an inheritance, something that's going to be passed down. My son knows, and he's an artist too, third generation, that everything in this studio is basically his. And so I think that part of this is really dealing with that word of inheritance and making it important, making it an heirloom, make it something that's being shared with the family, because I'm watching artists' works get tossed in a dumpster because their family have no connection to what the artist was doing. And so, yeah, I respect all sides of the business. And but I think that I'm more concerned about the elitism that's taken while people are making that move to start collecting work, because some of them never collected work before. And so I challenge people to, number one, buy what you like, speak to who you are and what's the reflection of your family. Make sure that they understand that it's shared amongst their family, and make sure it becomes part of their inheritance. And that also breeds them into going to other levels of art. Because some of these people who had just bought a poster or a print at home that was affordable probably never walked into a museum before. They don't know who the masters are. And I think that once you start a beginning point, there's a beginning point and an end point, and then there's an elitist space. I'm trying to talk about the picture as the whole space rather than one section of the space.
All right. Well, that is very insightful, and also a point that we needed to have. Can everyone kind of mute yourself if you're not speaking? And what we're going to do, instead of the rapid fire where you would have to have 10 seconds, an opportunity to close out and give us, about a minute, up to a minute, in a closing comment. And I think it's important. And I thank Lisa and Alicia for giving us an opportunity to close out properly. So for each of you, we'll have parting words. And I ended with you, Dr. Holton, so I'll begin with you on parting words.
Okay. Well, I'm going to build on what Larry was mentioning. There's not just one art world. There are different kinds of art worlds. And for example, Poncho might be experiencing a certain art world that's not the same art world that Sam Gilliam is experiencing or Amy Sherrill is experiencing. So there are many different kinds of art worlds. So we had to make sure we understand it's a very diverse, what we call the art world. The canon is something that we have to be mindful of, but what is the canon? And I think that does speak to the notion of elitism. But one thing that's important about this notion of canon in a more classical art world is how that work is documented for generations, that is passed on beyond you. For example, let's take Charles White. Charles White is someone that was extremely gifted, capable during his mature years of practice. There were other artists that were less quality artists, less capable, less skillful, that were having higher recognition, major museum shows. These were predominantly white artists. But he persevered, and there was an audience for him. There was an art world for him. And eventually his work was captured and recognized by the larger canon. And we've seen this in the last 20 years, what has happened. We see this with Sam Gilliam in the marketplace. We see it with Amy's work. It just goes on and on. But my point I'm trying to make is there is a world that is allowing us in to be canonized, and there's a world that is our community that has nothing to do with the elite art world. So it's important to recognize that. I worked with Faith Ringel for many years, for example, very successful. Before she became successful, she was very successful. Children books, soft sculpture, the paintings, and she was ridiculed by the Academy because she was doing children books, but she was receiving awards and a significant income, very successful, more successful than her peers. Now she is canonized. But the point is that there are diverse art worlds. We got to be mindful of that. It's not just one art world, and we have to understand how to negotiate those range of territories. Museums do a very important thing for us, is they ensure that that work is a part of the national legacy, the panoply of our culture and of our world, that work is there, that someone has that work is recorded, not just family members and collectors, which is important. Don't misunderstand me. As Poncho pointed out, his child will inherit his legacy. So I'm going to close with this, is we got to be mindful how broad and dynamic this is, and think about what that art world is in a very particular way and in a very universal way, and how we fit into it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holton. And we'll move to Mr. Dade, Thomas Dade. Your closing remark. This is the gracious 1 minute closing remark that we've been provided. Please share your message to our viewing audience.
I'm like same way I've been saying throughout. It's just consistency, showing up, and utilizing the gifts that we have. Our filmmakers, visually, those images, those stories are so important. We're kind of tired of seeing slave films. So there's a lot of history within us that we sort of have to tell the story in the medium that we are gifted in, or that we're capable of showing the world what we're trying to say. There are many artists. We're all very talented. We all have a way of expressing ourselves through our art. And what I drive home most of all is, you start off right, you end up right. I started out loving art. I'm able to touch different people. People find joy in my art. They find pain in it. I'm just one artist. And as I'm on the panel with these other gentlemen, you know, we all have a gift and we all have a duty. So I just pledge to keep on doing what I'm doing. And, you know, we'll meet again on another plateau, you know, and we uplift each other, you know, and support one another, you know. And that thing of the doctors talking about critiquing, you know, we have to make each other stronger, you know, and be honest and sincere in our support.
Thank you.
So I like to end it with that. Just be authentic.
That's a perfect way to end. Be authentic. I certainly appreciate that. And Levi, we'll come to you now. You have to unmute, Levi.
Okay, got it.
Thank you, Jen.
When he over the past summer, when you know, the unrest, you know, reached a boiling point, I was given an opportunity to do a mural on St. John's Church, the Church of the Presidents. And what I chose to do was a mural of Desmond Tutu. And on that mural, I put the word Ubuntu, which is a Zulu phrase, which means
I am because you are.
Yes, I am.
I'm sorry, I didn't know my mic was on. I'm sorry.
Yes, I am because you are. And so, you know, what I felt, you know, was an opportunity, you know, to present this idea of, you know, collective responsibility, and, you know, through art, you know, this opportunity that I've been given, you know, to say something meaningful. You know, I try to always be mindful of the messages that I can send to my children. Before I do any of my murals, I do it's a doodle grid. And, you know, I'll doodle the names of my loved ones on my canvas before, my wall before I do the mural, and so they can see, my children can see their names on these pieces of art before I do them, and so I feel like it gives me an opportunity to sort of draw them in and try to deliver these messages. And I just think that, this gift that we have, gives us an opportunity, to really, really dig into this concept of oneness, and our responsibility for one another. And I think that's I guess what I want to close with is, it's great, to have, panel discussions like this. I learned so much from these gentlemen that are on the panel. And I feel like it's another testament to this idea that we're all connected, and we all have opportunities to help one another grow and to be responsible, for one another in some ways. I am my brother's keeper, and I just think, again, that's one of the greatest things that, Poncho talked about legacy. I think that's one of the greatest things that I can sort of try to, lean into, as, part of my legacy for the children, in this position of fatherhood that I find myself in.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we're going to go to David.
Yes.
These are your closing remarks.
What I like to say too is as you are painting your stories, to tell your stories, document your stories, document your artwork. We talked about people who take and throw your art out and what have you. And as I was growing up, we were like, I don't know what you call us, nomads, but everywhere we went, every time we moved, my father would throw out all my artwork. And so I don't have any of the artwork that I had when I was growing up. So what I decided to do once I started painting and once I had access to a computer, I started documenting and photographing my artwork and telling my own story about my own history. And because my mother was an artist and she didn't have access to computers or different things of that nature, I tell her story along with my story. And I mention the names of the artists who influenced me and who helped me along the way so that their history and their contributions are included. You can publish your own stuff now. And if you just do it to have a history for yourself or something to leave for your families, you'll be also leaving something for the world. So I went through a company called Blurb Books, and I took my photos and I took my narratives and I put it in there. And it cost me a nice little chunk, but now I have something that's kind of like permanent in writing and documented. And I was able to, to give that book to certain people, and certain people bought it. So document your stuff. Tell your story. Tell the stories of the artists around you. Let them know what it costs you to do art. What it costs you to teach yourself. Those of us who are unlearned. I still want to go to school. I still want to, but a lot of people tell me, "Hey, don't do that. You do it all by yourself." They tell me you're good.
Mm-hmm.
I just say, document your work, even if you just document it for your own family. Put it in a book, put it in an archive where all your stuff is together, so somebody doesn't just throw it in the trash or leave it somewhere, and you don't have to rely on somebody else's memory. They will get the words right out of your mouth.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And lastly, we'll end with Poncho.
Well, what I want to say too is artists are one big connected family. Artists are one big connected family. The art business has so many facets. And I just think that we're right brain thinkers. We're right brain people. Right brain people feel the world different. We articulate the world different. We feel the world different. And so I want to speak to the artists out there. It doesn't matter what level you end up on, because art has the very elite, it has the fine art establishment, it has the commercially successful establishment, and then there's everybody else in the hobbyist or in between. You're part of that same family. There's only a small percentage of people that's going to make it to that hierarchy, but the masses of us are keeping this message alive. We're keeping art alive. We're keeping subjects relevant, whether you're famous or end up in the museum, or whether you're just tearing it up and connecting to people through your social media, or whether you're just as a hobbyist and you're sharing artwork with your family. We are still part of the same family, and we still have a huge responsibility.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll close out this segment by going back to Levi. Levi's comment, Ubuntu. I am because you are. We are because of our interconnectedness with each other. And if we remember that, then we'll remember how to change the narrative of Black fatherhood one positive image at a time. It's been an honor and a privilege to be on the panel with all of you distinguished gentlemen. And I just want to thank you and thank those who are tuning in. I want to turn back over to our co-producer and the other part of Black Art Today, Lisa Clark, so that she can have her comments as we begin to close out. And I thank our co-producers for extending it. I hope you all viewing didn't mind the extra 15 minutes, but we were having a real wonderful conversation. So I thank you, Lisa Clark.
Oh, thank you, Pat, so much for moderating, and all the gentlemen that are on the panel. I admire all of you, always. And Poncho was really the first artist I had the opportunity to come in contact with. And I was always intimidated by artists. So I'm like, oh my God, they're artists and they're famous, especially, coming in contact with Poncho. And I saw the humility and the humanity in him, and the work that he has done to raise consciousness and awareness and putting manhood and fatherhood in the forefront of the art world. Everyone here has made significant contributions, but we cannot deny the significant contributions that Larry Poncho Brown made during that heyday in the 80s and the early 90s. He broke through. He and Charles Bibbs and all the LaShawn Bill and all of those artists, and Charles White, all of them came out, and Paul Goodnight, all of them came out and just exploded on the scene, and they took advantage of a era in time in which we needed to be uplifted, and we're back at that point again. But I think we have more of an opportunity now to have that impact than we've ever had before. And Dr. Holton, you are the legacy. What you do is you're in a position to have more influence over the art world than anyone that's present in this panel, and probably within the United States. You, as the director of the David Driskell Center, you are in a position of power, the seat of power, to influence that, to carry on the things that David did. Let's go back to what you mentioned about him having the first exhibit that really tackled and the issue of the underrepresentation of Blacks in the art world, and that exhibit just shattered that. He did something that had not been done before, and I know he left you with the mantle, and I know you're going to take it and you're going to continue that legacy and that trailblazing that all these artists that are here need that. They need that direction from you, because you are a father of the art, of the Black arts, you and Poncho. So these young men and David and Levi and Thomas, no matter where they are in their art career, they're the sons of it. So all of you collectively have the responsibility to reach back and to communicate and convey the importance of the African American male, regardless of his role or stature in life. That's what you do through your art. You're speaking to people, like Levi said, you might have 2 minutes to convey a message, but you did. You took those 2 minutes and you use that medium to project a image, a message that's indelible, that's enduring. And that's the same for all of the art that you're producing. The same thing with Poncho, the same thing with David, same thing with Thomas. All of you are just making these amazing images that capture your essence, and not only as a Black man, but as a Black father. And every time that you produce something, you change the narrative. Every time you speak about your art, regardless if you create anything, but you're speaking about your art, you're changing the narrative. But most importantly, being the men that you are, you've changed the narrative. You're present. You're present as Black men in your community. You're present as fathers in the lives of your children. And that is how you truly change the image, the narrative. Is by being present. And that's what you are. And I applaud all of you. And you all are strong, Black kings. And I just want to thank all of you participating in the panel and providing all of us with a different perspective and just sharing your lives and your creativity with us. I really appreciate it. And Pat, thank you for leading the discussion. And that's all that I have. That's all I have. I've really enjoyed this. I know we kind of started a little slow, but we got into our groove, and I said, we can't let it go right now. Let's just keep going. And I know Poncho, he was biting at the opportunity to keep going. And I really appreciate everybody and everybody that tuned in. Thank you. We're going to continue to do this, continue to have conversations about the significant contributions that we make to society, to the world as a whole, not just what we do in our own little communities. We're the originators, and we're going to continue our telling our story, changing the narrative, creating legacies, and making a difference in this world. And that's all. I can back to you. Anybody else want to say anything before we sign off?
Part of this conversation with all of you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was an honor being here. I'm in love with Curlee Holton, so I might be tracking him down like real soon.
All right. I love it. I would love the two of you. I would love the two of you do a collaboration. Hint, hint.
Reach out.
I don't know about the collaboration, but I echo those words. I'm a huge fan. Everyone on this panel is, this was a great opportunity. Thank you for the invitation, and again, thank you, gentlemen, for being just being who you are.
I thank Levi for presenting that great and marvelous and wonderful chin hair, and hopefully I will be able to catch up with him in the next couple of years. So I also want to just thank everybody. It was very nice being able to talk with everybody and have this kind of communication. Very good. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Curlee. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Levi. And thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Pat.
Also, thank you, Lisa, for bringing us all together.
Okay, until next time. Until next time.
Till next time.
Take care, everyone.
All right.
get it to go a little longer,